the measurements as well. This is what really gets me, the ancient metrology of these sites. I mean, people have done a whole thing on the pyramids, or Stonehenge. They found what's called the megalithic yard, which is 2.72 feet, or it's 0.83 meters. That's found all across the British sites. This is something that Alexander Thom worked out. But there's actually an old canon of measurements, which are in the next few slides, where there's actually multiple different measurements that you can get. Here we have some of my crazy.
Holy smokes.
Yeah, this is what I put together. I managed to work out the measurements of Göbekli Tepe. So this is like a work in progress, so I'm still working on this.
Yeah.
But what we found is like if you find whole number measurements of different ancient measurement systems, they were probably using them. It's highly likely they were using them or something close to them. And now when you're looking at ancient sites and trying to understand the nature of, what measurements they were using, you're not always looking for one single measurement. People think, they only use one measurement. There's archaeologists at Stonehenge who claim there's only one measurement they use, but it's not how it worked. People like John Michell and John Neal, who are kind of my mentors for many years, who proved that there was a system of different lengths of the foot. There's probably a slide on it in a minute on here as well. Different lengths of the foot. So you got the British foot, then you got like the Persian foot, you've got the Sumerian foot, you've got the Assyrian foot, you've got the Saxon foot, you've got all these different foot lengths, probably 12, 15 of them. But they're all perfect fractions, harmonics away from the British foot, going a bit longer or a bit shorter. And so
how are they related to like the royal cubits and all that stuff the Romans were using?
It all fits in. I mean, you can see on here, look, you see the royal cubit is the diagonal of a square, and if you put a double square together, you got the megalithic yard is the diagonal of two squares, and things like this. And then the remen is one length of it, so everything fits in a really profound, weird manner. And so what we realized, and what John Michell and John Neal realized, is that you're not looking for one measurement. You're looking for a canon of measurements, maybe 12, 15 different measurements, but they all relate to each other by perfect harmonies. So it's almost like music. And so you often find in ancient sites, if you look carefully, 4 or 5 different measurements, because they wanted to apply the principles. It's almost like the languages or like the accents of that culture who was involved in building it. So it gets complicated, but really the elites were doing this, that the commoners weren't doing this. You didn't get the people hanging around, the tribes doing the work. There was elite people who had these understandings. And what gets even weirder is that most of these measurements are derived from the size of the earth. So that means they must have had an understanding of the size and shape of the earth going back nearly 12,000 years. And this backs up what Graham Hancock's been saying for years, that these old maps prove that they surveyed the earth in antiquity. And so this is how weird it gets when you start getting into it, because these measurements aren't arbitrary. They're not just made up. They're derived from measurements of the earth, fractions of the degree at certain latitudes and things like this. So it's quite hard to get your head around without having it fully visualized and shown. But this is what they were doing. And so there's a high chance.
How do you think they knew the exact circumference of the earth?
I think they were measuring. I think they had measurement. They had people going out to different latitudes, taking different measurements, using astronomy to do so, using shadows at certain times of the day and year. And then, marking that at different latitudes, and then you could work out the angles of the shadows and things like this. It was known they were doing that in ancient Egypt. This has been documented. So it's highly likely they were doing that here. And also, if you look into like things like the Book of Enoch, this remarkable, very weird book that used to be part of the whole kind of Old Testament. It talks about him being taken by the watchers or the angels to different latitudes where there was very different weather and different environments, and taking cords and going to measure. And this is going back into deep antiquity, the era they were talking about here. So it's even referenced in some of the old texts, some of the old sort of sacred texts.
Who did they say was being taken?
Enoch, one of the biblical line of Noah and all this kind of stuff. And so this is pretty strange. I mean, that can't be proven, obviously, but the fact that the evidence is there with the measurements that are being found at these sites, so they must have had some understanding. Now, they could have guessed it, but that's highly unlikely. But what it seems is like there was some very advanced group of people, possibly a large group of people, who were travelers as well. They weren't just located at Göbekli Tepe. They were going to different places.
Yeah.
They were taking measurements. For example, Stonehenge, they found these post holes where giant pine totem pole type objects would be placed in. They could have been up to 30 feet tall because they were like 3 feet wide, several feet deep. They're dated to 10,000 years old. And so this is weird. I mean, because Stonehenge wasn't built until 5,000 years after that, at least. So why were they marking the position of Stonehenge with these giant timber posts then, back in 10,000 years ago? It's quite weird. So I've got the impression, there we go, this is actually the post holes where what they would have looked like.
Which image?
And these are I think pretty much all the top ones there, and there's a reconstruction there as well.
Oh, these circle things?
Yeah, but they were originally, I mean, for a while, they were blobs of paint in the car park. That's all they were, because they're gone. They're just remnants of bits of charcoal at the bottom of them and things like this. But these go back 10,000 years. So these are really intriguing because it's almost like someone had gone out to different parts of the world and marked specific latitudes for measurements. And the thing about Stonehenge, it's a very important latitude when you start, if you want to understand astronomy and surveying, because it's at roughly 51 degrees, whereas Göbekli Tepe is 38 degrees north. But that latitude, what you have there is so between 51 and 52 degrees north, that measurement, if you actually measure it from 51 to 52, that is the mean polar circumference degree. So if you were to have a perfect circle, that's what that length would be of each degree, if you know what I mean. So it's a mean of the circle at that latitude, and similar things happen down at 38 degrees as well, to do with different elements of surveying. So it gets a bit intense, you know.
Yeah.
But we're going to write all this out in our next book and kind of explain it in detail with graphics, because it's quite hard to kind of get your head around. And we're still working on it. We're still trying to work out, you know, how they could have measured the Earth nearly 12,000 years ago. Because if you think about it as well, if there was some kind of if there was this Younger Dryas, which is looking very likely there was, impact event, chaos, things, everything got destroyed, whatever there was, the Ice Age was there for a while, this, that, and the other. Are they going to want to like have another, you know, these very elite, very smart people, there's probably survivors doing their thing, they're going to want to like remap the Earth, you know, really. They're going to want to work out where they are, because things have changed a bit. Flooding's happened, land masses have changed, the ice has shifted things around.
Yeah.
And so to me, there's a good case for that. I mean, it sounds we're going a bit far out here, but actually I think there's something to that for sure.